Madison Clark moved silently through the sparkling halls of the Lexington Hotel, a place that glittered with wealth, but never quite with kindness. At just 24 years old, her deep brown skin caught the soft glow of the crystal chandeliers, a quiet reminder of the resilience she carried with her every day. As a young woman of color navigating the upper echelons of New York City's hospitality scene, Madison knew too well the invisible barriers woven by both race and class. Yet here she was, serving with a grace and dignity that transcended the uniform she wore, a black and white ensemble that many saw as a symbol of service, but she knew was just a part of her journey. Her uniform might say server, but Madison had a secret. No one here knew she was the daughter of the man who owned it all. Robert Clark, a billionaire real estate mogul whose empire stretched across Manhattan and beyond, was a name whispered in boardrooms and among city elites. But to Madison, he was simply her father, a man she loved, but chose not to lean on, determined to understand the world beyond their towering skyscrapers and glittering penthouses. It was a choice born from a desire to witness firsthand the realities faced by those without the privileges she was born into, and to confront the quiet, persistent injustices that often went unseen. The evening air inside the Lexington was thick with the hum of soft jazz, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the murmur of polished conversations. The grand lobby shimmered with opulence, marble floors reflecting golden light that spilled from intricate chandeliers above. Madison moved through this world like a shadow present, but overlooked essential yet invisible. Her every step was measured. Her smile practiced but sincere, a carefully crafted armor against the subtle dismissals and outright indifferences she encountered. Though her skin was dark, warm, and radiant, to many here she was just the girl in the uniform, not the woman with dreams and intellect beneath. Ethan, her co-worker, and one of the few faces that brought light to the long shifts, caught up with her near the service station. He was a tall, easygoing man with a quick wit and a smile that cut through the weariness of the job. "Almost done with the dinner rush, huh?" he whispered, passing by with a wink. Madison gave a small nod, the ache in her feet a dull reminder of the hours yet to come. "Still got 2 hours to go," she replied softly, her voice steady despite the fatigue tugging at her shoulders. The camaraderie was a balm, a quiet acknowledgement that while the world around them often failed to see their worth, they saw each other. Yet for all the moments of kindness, Madison felt the weight of the invisible lines drawn so clearly in this world. The guests in their designer gowns and tailored suits spoke in hushed tones, their laughter light, but distant. To them, Madison was a fixture of service, a necessary but unremarked presence. She had grown accustomed to the way eyes would briefly glance, then look away, as if acknowledging her existence was a courtesy, never a connection. It was the subtle discrimination that gnawed at her spirit, the quiet assumption that a woman of color, no matter her lineage, belonged only to the role she was assigned. Tonight, as she adjusted a silver tray and aligned the glassware just so Madison reminded herself why she was here. Not for recognition or to prove a point, but to understand. To hold a mirror to the world's face and see the truth reflected back unvarnished and raw. Because beyond the glitz and glamour, there was a story waiting to be told, and she was determined to live it not as a shadow, but as a beacon. The host's radio crackled to life with an announcement that sliced through the ambient jazz. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Miss Jessica Turner." The name sent a ripple through the staff. Jessica was a socialite infamous for her sharp tongue and icy demeanor. Madison's heart steadied. This was no ordinary guest. The storm was about to arrive. In the heart of the dining hall, Jessica entered with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, her blonde hair shimmering under the golden light's emerald dress catching every eye. Her fingers danced across her phone screen as if the world revolved around her alone. The clicking of her heels against the marble echoed like a slow drum roll, marking her territory before she even spoke. To Madison and the other servers, Jessica was a reminder of the world's harshest truths, that wealth and privilege could cloak cruelty in a veil of elegance. Madison squared her shoulders, steadying her voice for the inevitable encounter. She was ready to serve, ready to face whatever indignities might come, all while carrying the quiet strength of a young woman of color determined to rise above. The evening had only just begun. Jessica Turner swept into the dining hall like a storm eyes glued to her phone heels, clicking with unapologetic confidence. The Lexington Hotel's grand ballroom shimmered with golden light, but Jessica, a striking blonde woman known throughout New York's elite circles, seemed to command every ray as if she owned the entire space. To Madison Clark, a young woman of color whose rich brown skin contrasted sharply against her crisp black and white uniform, Jessica's arrival felt like the first gust of a brewing tempest. Madison had heard stories whispered among the staff. Jessica Turner was not one to tolerate imperfection, especially from those she considered beneath her, and her sharp tongue was as famous as her designer gowns. Madison steadied herself, pushing the fatigue aside as she approached the table where Jessica had been seated. Her posture was professional, voice warm, yet controlled a reflection of years navigating the unspoken lines of race and class in this world. "Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to the Lexington. May I get you started with something to drink?" Madison's tone carried the respectful politeness expected in such places. Yet beneath it lay the quiet strength of a woman who refused to be diminished. Jessica glanced up briefly, her icy blue eyes flickering over Madison without recognition, then snapped her fingers impatiently. "Sparkling water, no ice. And make it quick, I don't have all night," she said, her words clipped, dismissive, the kind of cold indifference that spoke volumes. To her, Madison was nothing more than the uniform she wore, a service tool invisible beyond the role. But to Madison, each slight was a sting, a reminder of the walls she had yet to break through. She nodded calmly, retreating to fulfill the order. But the chill of Jessica's gaze lingered, a silent echo of the prejudices woven tightly into this world. Moments later, as Madison returned with the glass balanced carefully on her silver tray, the atmosphere shifted. Jessica's fingers, still dancing over her phone, reached out without looking and knocked the rim of the glass. The sparkling water spilled in a sudden sharp splash, drenching Madison's blouse and clinging to her skin. The gasps from nearby tables were immediate, the air momentarily suspended as if the music had faltered. For a woman of color in service, such public humiliation was not just accidental. It was a statement. Jessica blinked, finally looking up, her lips curling into a sneer. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" she barked, voice loud enough to cut through the murmur of the room. "Can't you do anything right?" The words hit Madison like a slap, igniting a heat that was both painful and infuriating. The diners around them shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes, others frozen in silent judgment. Madison's hands trembled briefly, wet and cold, against the napkin she hastily grabbed to dab at the spill, but her face remained composed, her voice steady. "I'm very sorry, ma'am. Let me get you another glass right away." Jessica waved her off with a dismissive flick of the hand. "Do they hire just anyone here?" she scoffed, leaning back in her chair with the air of someone accustomed to command. "Honestly, you're a walking disaster. I come to this hotel expecting excellence, not incompetence." Her voice was laced with disdain, carefully projected for maximum effect, as if she were performing for the room. Madison heard the subtle clicks of phones, as some diners discreetly recorded the exchange, their faces a mixture of shock and sympathy. Through it all, Madison remained still, her pride buried beneath layers of professionalism. She knelt slightly, dabbing at the spill with practiced motions, refusing to meet Jessica's gaze, not out of shame, but because she would not give power to cruelty. "I'll clean this up right away and have a fresh glass brought over." "No charge," she said softly. Jessica's laughter cut through the air like glass breaking sharp, high-pitched, and cruel. How generous, she mocked, but sweetie, girls like you don't belong in places like this. Her words, though quiet, were knives aimed to wound more than the spilled water ever could. Madison rose slowly, every inch the embodiment of quiet dignity. Her eyes met Jessica's with calm clarity, far more powerful than rage. "Yes, ma'am, I'll have that drink replaced immediately," she repeated, voice unwavering. Turning to leave, Madison carried herself with the strength of someone who refused to be broken. But Jessica was not finished. With a sudden, deliberate motion, she grabbed the glass of red wine recently delivered to her table and hurled it toward Madison's retreating back. The stemware shattered against the floor wine, splattering across Madison's uniform like a vivid, accusing stain. A collective gasp echoed through the room, disbelief and outrage rippling among the guests. Jessica burst into laughter, a triumphant cackle that filled the space with venom. "Maybe that will teach you to pay attention," she called out, her voice ringing with mockery. Madison stood frozen for a moment, the cold wine soaking through her blouse and skirt, but her breath steadied. She did not flinch or cry. Instead, she pressed a fresh napkin against the worst of the stain, the faint tremor in her hands betraying the storm within. The room buzzed with tension, some guests whispering in disgust, others reaching for their phones, and Ethan watching with wide eyes from behind the service station. Amid the hum of murmurs and the soft strains of jazz, Madison's quiet resilience spoke louder than any words. Her uniform, soaked and stained, had become armor not of fabric, but of unyielding strength in the face of injustice. The night had taken a harsh turn, but Madison Clark, a young woman of color, determined to claim her dignity, was far from defeated. The story unfolding was no longer just about spilled drinks. It was about a battle fought in silence and perseverance, one that would soon demand a reckoning. A silent tension filled the room as Robert Clark entered, the owner of the Lexington Hotel, carrying decades of authority in his gaze. His presence was commanding not because of loud words or gestures, but because of the quiet confidence that only true power could bring. Robert, a man of color, whose deep mahogany skin and silver-streaked hair reflected a lifetime of perseverance, scanned the grand dining hall with sharp, discerning eyes. This was his domain, and tonight it was about to bear witness to a reckoning far beyond spilled drinks or social etiquette. Jessica Turner, the blonde socialite who had just publicly humiliated Madison Clark, a young woman of color serving with quiet dignity, suddenly found herself caught in the weight of a presence she could not ignore. Her usual smirk faltered as she met Robert's steady gaze. For the first time that evening, the room seemed to hold its breath, the soft jazz fading into an almost palpable silence. Madison, soaked and trembling, stood near the service station, her dark skin glistening faintly under the chandelier light. She was no longer just a server in a black and white uniform. She was the daughter of this man, a truth hidden beneath layers of pride and determination. Robert's footsteps echoed purposefully as he approached Jessica's table, flanked by Mark, the hotel's manager, who carried himself with practiced professionalism. "Miss Turner." Robert began, his voice calm but firm. "I have been watching this evening unfold." His words cut through the murmurs, holding the attention of every guest present. "You came into my hotel, insulted my staff, humiliated a young woman of color who works here with honor, and then you escalated that humiliation with reckless cruelty." Jessica's lips parted as if to speak, but Robert raised a hand gently to silence her. "Let me be clear," he continued. "That staff member is not just an employee. She is my daughter." The room collectively gasped, whispers rippling like waves. Jessica's confident facade cracked her blue eyes, darting nervously toward the exit, toward Mark, toward anywhere but Robert's unwavering gaze. Robert stood tall, the lines of his face set with resolve. This kind of behavior will not be tolerated here. Excellence means respect, dignity, and accountability. You have failed on all 3 counts tonight. His tone was neither harsh nor vindictive. It was the voice of justice, steady and unyielding. Mark stepped forward, his presence reinforcing Robert's command. "Miss Turner, I must ask you to leave. You are no longer welcome at the Lexington." Jessica rose slowly, the carefully rehearsed words she had prepared now lost to the weight of exposure. Her heels clicked sharply on the marble floor as she turned the room's eyes following her every step. As Jessica was escorted out, Madison felt a wave of emotions crash over her relief, exhaustion, and a fierce pride that refused to be diminished by the night's earlier humiliation. Ethan approached quietly, offering a supportive nod, while guests exchanged looks of admiration and newfound respect. Outside the private lounge, the city's night air felt cooler, the sounds of traffic, a distant murmur compared to the storm that had just passed within the hotel walls. Madison wiped the last traces of wine from her sleeve, standing a little taller, knowing this moment was more than just personal vindication. It was a step toward dismantling the walls of prejudice and inequality she faced every day. The Lexington Hotel, a symbol of wealth and privilege, had become the stage for a lesson in humanity, one that reverberated far beyond its polished marble floors. And as Madison returned to her duties, the sparkle in her eyes reflected not just the chandeliers above, but the unbreakable spirit of a young woman determined to rise. The Lexington Hotel buzzed with whispers, and phone screens lit up. Madison's story was already going viral. The soft hum of jazz in the background seemed to pause every time someone glanced at their phone, eyes flickering with disbelief and growing admiration. Madison Clark. A young woman of color was no longer just a server in a black and white uniform. She had become a symbol of quiet strength and dignity amid the storm that had erupted the night before. Despite the growing attention, Madison quietly returned to her station, refusing to let fame change who she was. Her deep brown skin glowed under the soft lighting as she moved with the same grace and calm composure she had always carried. The stains on her uniform from the spilled wine had been carefully cleaned, but the memory lingered in her mind, a stark reminder of the injustices she faced simply because of her race and role. She was determined not to be defined by that moment, but by the strength she showed in enduring it. Ethan, her co-worker and friend, caught up with her near the service station. His easy smile was a comforting presence in the hectic pace of the hotel. "You sure you want to be here today?" he asked quietly, concern flickering in his eyes. "After everything?" Madison nodded, tying her apron with practiced ease. "Why wouldn't I be?" she replied with a small, steady smile. "The uniform didn't change overnight. Neither did I." The shift continued, but something was different. Guests who once passed Madison with barely a glance now greeted her with warmth and respect. Some paused to share kind words, while others discreetly pulled out their phones to capture moments of her steady service. A middle-aged couple from Chicago stopped Madison mid-aisle, a gentle smile on the woman's face as she extended a hand. "We saw the video," she whispered, eyes shining with admiration. "You handled yourself with such grace. I hope our daughter grows up with your kind of strength." Madison returned the smile, nodding in quiet gratitude, before moving on to her duties. In the corners of the hotel, staff members stood a little taller, their pride boosted by the support that Madison's story had inspired. Conversation shifted, and a new awareness settled among the guests, a reminder that behind every apron and tray was a person worthy of respect, regardless of the color of their skin or the title they held. Yet Madison remained grounded. The world outside might now see her as the daughter of Robert Clark, the billionaire owner of the Lexington, but she refused to let that change her path. Her purpose was not to bask in the spotlight, but to continue working with the same dedication and humility. She was more than a moment in a viral video. She was a person with dreams, struggles, and a fierce commitment to justice. Upstairs in the executive office, Robert Clark reviewed headlines that flashed across his screen. The story of his daughter, the server who had faced public humiliation and stood tall, was everywhere. Power meets grace, one headline read. How one woman's dignity sparked a viral reckoning, another proclaimed. Robert hadn't planned to speak to the press, but a carefully crafted statement had been released. At the Lexington, we believe dignity is not a luxury. It is a right. We stand by our staff always, but what struck him most wasn't the media frenzy. It was the image captured by the hotel's security cameras. Madison still at work, pouring coffee with deliberate care, listening intently to a guest's request, a portrait of unwavering grace. She had been tested in the harshest way, defended by a father she never asked for, and yet remained unbroken. Meanwhile, the backlash against Jessica Turner intensified. Her Instagram went dark, brand partnerships quietly severed, and former employees shared stories of verbal abuse and entitlement. The carefully curated image of privilege and untouchability crumbled beneath the weight of her own arrogance. Justice, it seemed, had found a digital battleground. Still, Madison stayed untouched by the social media storm. When a guest discreetly slipped her $100 bill with a wink and words praising her viral moment, she politely declined. "I'm not a moment," she said softly. "I'm a person." The phrase spread quickly, quoted across platforms celebrated as poetic. But for Madison, it was simply the truth. Later that evening, after the dinner rush had settled, Madison stepped out onto the hotel balcony. The spring sky was painted with hues of coral and violet as the Miami sunset faded. She leaned on the railing, letting the cool breeze wash over her skin, the salty air mingling with distant city sounds. In that quiet moment, she reflected on how easy it would have been to quit, to retreat into the safety that her father's name could offer. But giving up would mean surrendering everything she had fought to build. Robert joined her, silently standing beside her without a word. After a pause, he said softly, "You didn't have to come in today." Madison glanced at him, then back to the horizon. "Yes, I did," she replied firmly. "Because if I didn't, then she would have won." Robert nodded, pride softening the lines on his face. "The world's watching you now." Madison smiled faintly. "Let them watch as long as they see me for who I really am." In that moment, under the fading light, Madison Clark stood tall, not just as the daughter of a billionaire, but as a woman of color who had been tested and had not flinched. Her story was far from over, and the quiet strength she carried was a beacon for those who still fought to be seen and respected. Jessica Turner faced a storm, her carefully curated world unraveling with alarming speed. The socialite who had once ruled the rooms of New York's elite found herself isolated, her Instagram feed, dark sponsorships quietly withdrawn, and invitations rescinded. The public backlash was relentless, a wave of condemnation fueled by the viral video capturing her cruelty. Yet behind the glossy headlines and the harsh judgment lay a woman confronting a vulnerability she had long hidden beneath layers of entitlement and pride. Inside her upscale apartment overlooking Central Park, Jessica sat by the rain-streaked window, the city's lights blurred by the gentle patter against the glass. Her blonde hair, usually perfectly styled, fell loosely around her face, shadows softening her sharp features. The woman who had wielded privilege like a weapon was now facing the consequences alone. Messages from former assistants and colleagues surfaced, detailing years of verbal abuse and selfish demands. For the first time, Jessica felt the sting of true accountability. Unbeknownst to her, a quiet act of kindness was quietly unfolding. Robert Clark, the powerful yet compassionate owner of the Lexington Hotel, had instructed a close aide to send an anonymous package to Jessica. Inside was a note: "Strength is found in humility. May this help you find yours." Along with the note, a small gesture of support, a gift card for counseling services, a reminder that redemption was possible, even for those who had lost their way. Jessica read the note several times, the words sinking in, slowly unraveling the defenses she had built. She glanced at the gift card, her fingers trembling. It was a lifeline extended without expectation, a contrast to the harshness she had shown others. Tears welled quietly in her eyes as the realization dawned mercy could come from the most unexpected places. A concerned friend who had remained silent during Jessica's downfall visited to check on her. Their conversation was tentative, a fragile bridge toward understanding. Jessica confessed feelings of shame and regret, emotions unfamiliar yet oddly relieving. The woman of privilege was beginning a journey toward self-reflection, humbled by the experience and the unexpected compassion she had received. Outside the glare of public scrutiny, Jessica's transformation was subtle but genuine. It wasn't about regaining status or popularity. It was about confronting her flaws and making amends. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, hope flickered in her heart. Meanwhile, Madison Clark continued her work at the Lexington with steady determination. The events of the night before had shifted the hotel's atmosphere. Respect and kindness rippled through the staff and guests alike. Madison's resolve strengthened her role, transcending that of a server, to become a symbol of dignity and perseverance for many who had once been invisible. Robert Clark watched his daughter's quiet strength with pride, knowing that true power lay not in wealth or titles, but in character and compassion. The story unfolding at the Lexington was one of broken barriers, an unexpected redemption, a testament to the human capacity for change. Jessica Turner's fall from grace, and the grace she was beginning to embrace herself, marked a turning point. It was a reminder that even amidst privilege and power, the path to humility and justice was open to all willing to walk it. And in that path, Madison and Robert Clark stood as beacons of hope and resilience, illuminating a way forward for a world still learning to see beyond color and status. Spring sunlight spilled over the city as Madison stood on the hotel balcony, feeling stronger than ever. The early morning breeze carried the faint sounds of New York, waking up distant honks, footsteps on sidewalks, the hum of life that never truly slept. Madison's deep brown skin glistened softly in the warm light, a testament to both the battles she had endured and the resilience she had nurtured within. This moment was quiet, yet it held the weight of 1,000 unspoken victories. Robert Clark joined her silently, the two standing side by side overlooking Central Park. His presence was steady, like the solid foundation he had always been in her life, though he never pressured her to lean on his wealth or name. The cityscape stretched before them, a mosaic of possibilities and challenges, much like the path Madison had chosen. "You didn't have to come in today," Robert said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. Madison glanced at him, a small smile touching her lips. "Yes, I did," she replied firmly. "Because if I didn't, then she would have won." Her voice carried the strength of conviction, the kind that comes from knowing who you are and refusing to be defined by others' judgments. Robert nodded slowly, pride shining through the stern lines of his face. "The world's watching you now." Madison turned back to the view, the city bathed in golden hues. "Let them watch as long as they see me for who I really am." Her words hung in the air, a quiet declaration of identity and resilience. She wasn't here for pity, for fame, or for redemption. She was here for herself, a young woman of color, who had faced adversity with grace and had emerged unwavering. Their conversation drifted to the lessons learned, the battles fought not just in the hotel's glittering halls, but in every encounter where respect was demanded and dignity upheld. Robert spoke of the importance of kindness and justice, of breaking down the walls that divide people by race, class, or status. Madison listened, absorbing the wisdom of a father who had weathered storms and who now stood beside her, ready to face whatever came next. As the sun climbed higher, Madison felt a profound sense of peace. The stains on her uniform had long since faded, but the resolve etched deeper within her soul remained vivid. She was not just the daughter of a billionaire. She was a beacon for those who dared to stand tall in a world that often tried to keep them small. The Lexington Hotel, once just a place of work, had become a stage for change, a symbol of how dignity and strength could transcend circumstance. Madison's story was far from over, but this chapter closed with a promise to keep showing up, to keep fighting with grace, and to keep illuminating the path for others. Below, the city pulsed with life, endless and unyielding. Above, on the balcony, a young woman of color and her father stood united, a testament to the power of resilience, the beauty of compassion, and the radical justice found in simply being true to oneself. In the quiet moments after a long day, Madison Clark stood on the balcony, her gaze sweeping over the city that had both challenged and shaped her. The weight of the evening's trials had given way to a serene strength, a reminder that beneath every uniform, every role, there lies a story of perseverance and dignity waiting to be honored. Her journey, marked by courage, restraint, and unwavering resolve, gently echoes a timeless truth. True worth is never defined by status or skin color, but by the character we uphold in the face of adversity. This story reminds us that breaking down the walls of prejudice and injustice requires more than words. It demands steadfast commitment, quiet courage, and the courage to see beyond surface appearances. Just as we cannot judge a book by its cover, neither should we measure a person's value by their station or outward image. In the words of an old saying, like a lantern softly glowing in the window, a simple act of kindness can light the darkest paths we travel. So take a moment to reflect on the quiet gifts of compassion and understanding that surround you each day. If this story touched your heart, consider passing that warmth on to those who may need it most. Because sometimes it's the smallest gestures, seen or unseen, that spark the greatest change.